He gathered 200 guests to witness her failure as a single mother, but when she handed him 3 paternity tests, his mocking laughter turned into deafening silence. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The smell of fresh baked bread wafted through Café Lumiere as Emma Sullivan balanced 3 plates along her forearm, navigating between crowded tables with practiced grace. 8-hour shifts had taught her to move like water, fluid, adaptable, finding the path of least resistance through Manhattan's hungry lunch crowds. "Croque monsieur for table 7, she murmured to herself, depositing the first plate before an elderly woman who smiled warmly. "Thank you, dear. You remembered I like extra mustard on the side." Emma nodded, her chestnut hair falling slightly from its loose bun. "Of course, Mrs. Kaplan. You've ordered the same thing every Thursday for 2 years." As Emma served the remaining plates, she noticed Mrs. Kaplan struggling with her crossword puzzle. 7 letters? Existential despair in Russian literature? The older woman asked no one in particular. "Tosca," Emma answered automatically. "It's in Dostoevsky. Untranslatable, really. Something like spiritual anguish, but deeper." From the corner of her eye, Emma noticed a table of men in expensive suits turning to look at her. One man, tall, with perfectly coiffed dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, studied her with particular interest. "You read Dostoevsky?" he asked, voice rich with surprise and something else, amusement perhaps. Emma felt heat rising to her cheeks. "When I can. Between shifts and sleep." Later, as she cleared their table, she found a business card beneath a $100 tip. Blake Montgomery, Executive Vice President, Montgomery Enterprises. On the back, handwritten in precise strokes, "Dinner tomorrow? Dostoevsky enthusiasts are rare in my circle." That had been 8 months ago. Now, Emma stood before the bathroom mirror in her cramped Newark apartment, staring at the 3rd pregnancy test showing 2 pink lines. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped it into the sink. "Positive," she whispered. "All 3 positive." She placed her palm flat against her still flat stomach. For 12 days, she'd attributed her missed period to stress, to the late nights with Blake at the theater, the weekends in the Hamptons, the dinners at restaurants where entrees cost more than her daily wages. But now there was no denying it. At 22, Emma Sullivan, the Newark waitress who read Russian literature between shifts, was carrying Blake Montgomery's child. She dressed carefully in the pale blue dress Blake had bought her last month, the one he said matched her eyes. They hadn't planned to meet today, but this couldn't wait. Blake had always been kind, generous, thoughtful. He called her his real-world inspiration when introducing her to Harvard friends. Surely, despite the shock, he would support her, maybe even be happy eventually. The Montgomery building on Park Avenue stretched toward the clouds, all gleaming glass and authority. Emma's reflection fractured across its surface as she approached. One nervous woman multiplied into an army of uncertain faces. "May I help you?" asked the receptionist, eyeing Emma's simple dress and worn leather bag. "I'm here to see Blake Montgomery." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm Emma Sullivan. He'll want to see me." The receptionist's expression changed slightly. Recognition, perhaps judgment. Everyone in Blake's orbit seemed to know about his waitress girlfriend, the novelty act he kept separate from galas and board meetings. "One moment, Miss Sullivan." Minutes later, Emma was escorted to the 47th floor, past glass offices where important people did important things with important money. Blake's secretary, a woman who had spoken to Emma on the phone dozens of times but never met her in person, smiled tightly. "He's reviewing contracts, but he said you can go in." Blake didn't look up when she entered his private meeting room. His Mont Blanc pen moved steadily across documents spread before him. Emma took a moment to study him, the confident angle of his shoulders beneath his bespoke suit, the precise part in his dark hair, the signet ring bearing his family crest. "Blake," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "We need to talk. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was colder than a New York winter. Blake's pen stopped moving but remained pressed to paper. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked 7 times before he spoke. "Are you sure it's mine?" The question hit Emma like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step backward, her calf striking the edge of a leather chair. "Of course it's yours," she managed, voice barely above a whisper. "You know I've only been with you." Blake finally set down his pen and looked up. His storm-gray eyes, once warm when they gazed at her across rumpled sheets or candle-lit tables, now calculated something behind their surface. "Let's be practical, Emma. You're a waitress from Newark with no college degree. I'm the next CEO of Montgomery Enterprises. This isn't a Disney story." He stood and walked to the wall safe hidden behind an abstract painting worth more than Emma would earn in 5 years. He entered the combination, removed a checkbook, and returned to the mahogany desk. $10,000, he said, writing with the same elegant strokes that had once penned love notes on hotel stationery. "Enough to solve the problem and start fresh somewhere else. Chicago, perhaps? Denver? Anywhere away from my social circles." Emma stared at the check he slid across the polished surface, unable to process his meaning for several heartbeats. "I'm not asking for money," she finally said, tears escaping despite her determination to remain composed. "I'm telling you we're having a baby." Blake smiled, not with the warmth that had made her fall in love, but with condescension that made her feel smaller than she already did in this cavernous office. "Emma, let's be realistic. You were an interesting interlude, a waitress who reads Dostoevsky, like a character from an indie film. But you're not Montgomery material. You lack education, connections, frankly. You lack what's necessary for this world." Emma pushed the check back toward him. "I don't want your money. I thought you'd want to know about your child." Blake's jaw tightened. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Janet, could you send security to my office? Immediately." "Blake, please." "You know, I anticipated something like this eventually," he continued, straightening his cufflinks. "Pretty girl from the wrong side of the tracks. Opportunity for advancement. I just didn't expect the pregnancy angle so soon." 2 men in dark suits appeared at the door with alarming speed. "Please escort Miss Sullivan out of the building," Blake instructed. "She's emotionally unstable." "Blake, don't do this," Emma pleaded as the security guards took her arms. "We need to talk about this properly." "There's nothing to discuss," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "The check is yours if you want it. Consider it severance for our arrangement." The guards guided her firmly toward the elevator. Emma's mind raced, unable to process how quickly her world had collapsed. Just yesterday, Blake had texted that he missed her smile. Last weekend, he'd traced patterns on her bare back while quoting Pushkin from memory. The elevator descended swiftly, each floor marking another level of humiliation. In the main lobby, crowded with executives and clients, Emma struggled against the guard's grip. "Please, just let me talk to him again," she begged. Blake emerged from a second elevator, striding confidently across the marble floor. For one hopeful moment, Emma thought he had reconsidered. Instead, he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "It's the old pregnancy trap to score a payday. Desperate, isn't it? Check your wallets, gentlemen." Laughter rippled through the lobby. Emma's face burned with shame as the revolving doors pushed her out onto the freezing sidewalk, where snow had begun to fall. She stood there, coatless, her winter jacket left upstairs in her haste to exit Blake's office, as fat snowflakes melted against her heated cheeks. When Emma finally made it back to Newark, another shock awaited. Her roommate Jen met her at the door, expression grim. "Some guy called the landlady claiming you're involved in illegal activities. She's evicting us, no exceptions. Your stuff is boxed up in the lobby, and she's keeping the security deposit." Emma stared at her belongings, 3 cardboard boxes containing her entire life, stacked haphazardly beside the building's mailboxes. After helping Jen move her own things to her sister's apartment, Emma was truly alone. That night, Emma slept in the Port Authority bus terminal, using her coat as a blanket, her backpack as a pillow. She checked her bank account on her cracked phone screen, $237. 41. Not enough for a new apartment, barely enough for temporary shelter. The next morning, dizzy from hunger and lack of sleep, she purchased a one-way ticket to Boston, where a distant cousin might offer temporary refuge. While waiting in the Greyhound terminal, the first waves of nausea hit her, violent enough to send her stumbling toward the public restroom. A concerned janitor found her collapsed in a stall and called an ambulance. At the emergency room, Emma explained her situation in halting fragments. The attending physician ordered blood work and an ultrasound, just to be safe. "Miss Sullivan?" The ultrasound technician's voice sounded strange. "I'm seeing something unusual here." Emma's heart stuttered. "Is something wrong with the baby?" "Not wrong exactly, but I'm detecting 3 distinct gestational sacs. You're carrying triplets." The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma. "Triplets?" she repeated numbly. 3 days later, curled uncomfortably on her cousin's sofa in Dorchester, a working-class Boston neighborhood, Emma watched Blake Montgomery on CNBC announcing his engagement to Vanessa Rothschild, heiress to a banking fortune. "Our worlds were always destined to unite," he said, smiling for the cameras, arm wrapped possessively around a willowy blonde whose diamond ring caught the studio lights. That cold morning, sitting in a corner coffee shop with an unemployment form, Emma made a silent promise to herself and the 3 tiny beings growing inside her. "He thinks I have no value, that I'm not enough, that I'm boring and irrelevant. One day, Blake Montgomery, you'll look at me and your children and understand exactly what you threw away. And it won't be revenge that drives me to success, but because you were profoundly wrong about who I am." Emma pressed the unemployment form against the cold laminate of the coffee shop table, her pen hovering uncertainly above the line marked, "Reason for termination." What could she write? Pregnant with triplets by billionaire who denied paternity. Professionally ghosted. She settled on position eliminated, a technical truth that concealed the messy reality. Outside the window of the dingy Dorchester Cafe, Boston's February sleet pelted pedestrians hurrying past with hunched shoulders. The weather matched Emma's mood, cold, bleak, unforgiving. 3 days on her cousin Mara's lumpy sofa had left her with persistent back pain, though she couldn't tell if that was from the uncomfortable sleeping arrangement or the early stages of her surprising pregnancy. "More coffee, hun?" The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and tired feet, hovered with a pot of burnt-smelling brew. "Just water, please," Emma replied, resting her hand instinctively on her still flat stomach. "Cutting back on caffeine." The waitress's eyes followed the gesture, understanding dawning. "First one?" Emma managed a weak smile. "First 3, apparently." The older woman's eyebrows shot up. "Triplets? Lord have mercy, your husband must be beside himself." The question landed like a slap. Emma looked down at her unemployment form. No husband, just me. The awkward silence that followed was mercifully brief. The waitress set down her coffee pot and slid into the booth opposite Emma. "Listen, I don't normally do this, but my sister runs the WIC office downtown. Women, infants, and children," she clarified, seeing Emma's confusion. "Government program for expectant mothers and young children. They can help with nutrition, healthcare referrals. You look like you could use a hand." Emma swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. 1 week ago, she'd been dining at Per Se with Blake, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Now she was being offered charity by a kind stranger who recognized desperation when she saw it. "Thank you," she managed. "That would be helpful." The next morning, Emma stood in line at the WIC office, surrounded by other women in various stages of pregnancy and mothers with infants and toddlers. The fluorescent lights emphasized the dark circles under everyone's eyes, Emma's included. She clutched the application forms the waitress's sister had expedited for her, feeling simultaneously grateful and humiliated. "Sullivan, Emma?" called a caseworker after an hour's wait. The office was small, with motivational posters about breastfeeding and child development on the walls. The caseworker, Diane, wore practical clothing and a no-nonsense expression that softened when Emma explained her situation, the abbreviated version that omitted Blake's name and wealth. "Triplets," Diane repeated, making notes. "High-risk pregnancy. You'll need specialized prenatal care. Do you have health insurance?" Emma shook her head. "I was on a workplace plan, but—" She trailed off. "Medicaid will cover you during the pregnancy. I'll get you those forms, too." Diane looked up. "Housing situation?" "Temporary. My cousin's couch." Diane's lips thinned. "Not sustainable, especially with triplets coming. Let me make some calls about emergency housing assistance." 2 hours later, Emma left with a stack of papers, appointments for prenatal care at Boston Medical Center, and a temporary food assistance card. As she waited for the bus back to Mara's apartment, she noticed a boutique baby store across the street. The window displayed a pristine white crib with a mobile of stars and moons dangling above it. The price tag visible even from a distance, $899. Emma did the math automatically. 3 babies, 3 cribs, nearly $3,000 just for places for them to sleep. Her hand went to her coat pocket, where the food assistance card felt like both a lifeline and a brand of failure. Her phone buzzed, a news alert about Montgomery Enterprises acquiring a luxury hotel chain in Asia. Blake's face smiled from the screen, his arm around his new fiancée at the press conference. That night, Emma returned to find Mara sitting at her small kitchen table, eyes red-rimmed, an eviction notice placed prominently on the scratched surface. "I got laid off," Mara said without preamble. "They're outsourcing the entire customer service department. I can't make rent next month." Emma sank into the chair opposite her cousin, the day's stack of assistance applications sliding from her numb fingers. "When do we have to leave?" 30 days. Mara looked up, her expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. "I'm going to move in with my boyfriend in Providence. His place is tiny, just a studio. I can't—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. "I understand," Emma said, though understanding didn't make the reality any less terrifying. "I'll figure something out." 2 days later, Emma sat in the crowded waiting room of Boston Medical Center's prenatal clinic. Women in various stages of pregnancy filled every chair, some with partners, many alone. Emma had been waiting for 3 hours, her appointment time long past. "Sullivan?" called a nurse finally, mispronouncing her name. The exam room was cold. Emma changed into a thin paper gown that crackled with every movement, waiting another 45 minutes before a harried-looking doctor entered without knocking. "Triplets, first pregnancy, unemployed, uninsured," the doctor recited from her chart without making eye contact. "High risk all around. We'll need to monitor you closely." The ultrasound revealed 3 distinct heartbeats, tiny flutters on the grainy screen. The doctor pointed clinically to each one. Identical, most likely. Sharing a placenta. Increased risk of complications. Emma barely heard the medical terminology that followed. Something about selective reduction being an option, the increased risks of carrying multiples, bed rest in later trimesters. All she could focus on was the sound of those heartbeats, the visual proof that inside her were 3 lives depending entirely on her ability to keep them safe. "Any questions?" the doctor asked, already halfway to the door. Emma had hundreds but managed just one. "How do I do this alone?" The doctor paused, finally making eye contact. His expression softened marginally. "You'll need support. Family, friends, community resources. This isn't a journey for the solitary." That night, Emma didn't return to Mara's apartment. Instead, she sat in a 24-hour diner, counting coins for a cup of soup, researching homeless shelters on her phone while the battery drained to critical levels. None seemed safe for a pregnant woman, let alone one carrying triplets. It was there, face illuminated by the harsh glow of her dying phone, that Nurse Marie found her. The older woman had been working intake at the prenatal clinic earlier that day. "I thought that was you," Marie said, sliding into the booth uninvited. "You've been here since your appointment ended 5 hours ago." Emma looked up, embarrassed to be caught in her desperation. "Just planning my next steps." Marie's gaze was knowing but not pitying. "You don't have anywhere to go tonight, do you?" Before Emma could formulate a denial, Marie continued, "I volunteer with a transitional housing program for women in crisis. We have a community house in Roxbury. It's not luxurious, but it's safe, warm, and there's a specific program for expectant mothers." 2 hours later, Emma stood in a small bedroom in a renovated Victorian house in Roxbury. The room held 2 twin beds, 2 dressers, and little else. The wallpaper was faded floral. The window overlooked a narrow alley, but it was clean and warm. "You'll share with Louisa," explained the house manager, a former social worker named Gabrielle. "She's 7 months along, works nights as a hospital cleaner. Rules are simple: no drugs, no alcohol, no men on the premises, contribute to house chores as you're able, and attend weekly life skills workshops." Emma set her single backpack on the unclaimed bed. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done tonight. That's why we exist." Gabrielle handed her a welcome packet. "There's information about GED programs, job training, childcare resources. You mentioned you didn't finish high school?" Emma nodded, the old shame resurfacing. She'd dropped out at 17 when her mother's illness required round-the-clock care. After her mother's death, returning to school had seemed pointless. Survival took precedence over education. "Education is your way forward," Gabrielle said firmly, "especially with 3 children depending on you." That night, Emma met Louisa, a Dominican immigrant whose boyfriend had disappeared when she announced her pregnancy. Despite the language barrier, Louisa immediately adopted Emma into her life, showing her how to sew baby clothes from thrift store fabrics and stretching ingredients to make meals last. "You have 3 babies? You need 3 times food," Louisa insisted, sharing her carefully hoarded groceries. "I teach you make 1 chicken last whole week." Days fell into a pattern. Mornings at prenatal appointments, afternoons applying for jobs that wouldn't hire a visibly pregnant woman, evenings at the community house learning to prepare for motherhood on a nearly non-existent budget. At night, after Louisa returned from her cleaning shift and fell into exhausted sleep, Emma studied for her GED by flashlight, determined not to waste the chance she'd been given. 3 weeks into her stay, Emma's blood pressure spiked dangerously during a routine checkup. The monitor beeped insistently as the nurse rechecked the reading. 160/95, the nurse confirmed. "Doctors ordering bed rest. You need to minimize stress." Emma laughed hollowly. "Minimize stress? I'm homeless, unemployed, and pregnant with triplets." "All the more reason to take this seriously. Preeclampsia can be life-threatening, for you and the babies." That afternoon, Emma sat in the community house's small living room, leafing through a discarded Fortune magazine someone had left on the coffee table. Blake's face stared back at her from the glossy pages. "The future of business," proclaimed the headline above his perfectly photogenic smile. Emma traced his features with her fingertip, then placed her palm on her growing belly where his sons grew. With sudden determination, she tore the page from the magazine and carried it to her room, where she pinned it to the wall above her narrow bed. On the back of a prenatal appointment card, she began writing a list. GED by June. Community college applications by August. Explore scholarships for single mothers. Research STEM programs. Learn coding basics. As the other residents of the house dreamed of men who might return to rescue them, Emma plotted a path that would, in 15 years, position her as the only person capable of buying Blake Montgomery's entire company, if she so desired. The list of goals Emma had written felt like both a prayer and a promise. As she stared at it in the dim light of the transitional home, Her hand rested protectively over the growing swell of her abdomen. Each tiny movement within reminded her that time was no longer her own. The future had accelerated toward her with unrelenting speed. On a bitter March morning 2 weeks later, that future arrived even faster than expected. Emma woke to a sharp, twisting pain that made her gasp. At first, she dismissed it as normal pregnancy discomfort. Her body was carrying triple the weight after all. But when a second contraction seized her 30 minutes later, panic flared bright and hot. "Louisa," she whispered, trying not to disturb the other women still sleeping in the shared room. "Something's wrong." Her roommate was instantly alert, maternal instinct overriding her need for rest after a night shift scrubbing hospital floors. One look at Emma's face told her everything. "Too early," Louisa said, already reaching for the emergency contact list posted by their door. "Baby's not ready." The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes, though it felt like hours to Emma. Each contraction brought terror. She was only 28 weeks along. Too soon, far too soon for 3 babies already at high risk. 22-year-old female, Gravida 1, Para 0, triplet pregnancy at 28 weeks with active contractions. The paramedic rattled into his radio as they loaded Emma into the ambulance. Preeclampsia diagnosis in medical history, blood pressure 150/95. Emma lay on the stretcher, gripping the cold metal railing as the sirens wailed overhead. Alone. She was completely alone in this moment that should have been shared. The thought of Blake, in his penthouse, planning his society wedding, made another kind of pain rip through her, one the medications couldn't touch. "Stay with us, Miss Sullivan," the paramedic urged, noticing her tears. "We're going to take good care of you and your babies." In the emergency room, organized chaos erupted around Emma. A doctor in scrubs appeared at her side, speaking rapidly to the nurses while scanning Emma's charts. "We need 3 neonatal teams on standby. Alert the NICU, we have triplets incoming at 28 weeks, he ordered before turning to Emma. "Miss Sullivan, I'm Dr. Reeves. We're going to try to stop your labor, but I need you to understand that triplets at 28 weeks may decide to come regardless of what we do. Are you the only family member present?" Emma nodded, another contraction stealing her voice. "Is there someone we should call? The father of the babies?" "No," Emma managed through gritted teeth. "There's no one to call." 27 hours later, despite magnesium sulfate and strict bed rest, Michael, Matthew, and Mason Sullivan entered the world in rapid succession, each weighing less than 3 pounds. Emma caught only glimpses of their tiny, translucent bodies before they were whisked away to incubators, trailing wires and surrounded by medical teams, speaking in urgent, clipped sentences. "Are they alive?" she asked the nurse who remained behind, her voice raw from hours of labor. "They're fighters," the nurse assured her, squeezing her hand. "Premature triplets are critical by definition, but our NICU is one of the best in the country." 4 hours passed before Emma was allowed to see her sons. Wheeled into the NICU in a hospital bed, she felt like an intruder in a science fiction movie. Machines beeped rhythmically, monitoring 3 impossibly small lives. Each baby lay in a separate incubator, skin nearly transparent, ribs visible with each labored breath, eyes fused shut. Tubes smaller than drinking straws delivered oxygen, medication, and nutrition. "They're so small," Emma whispered, pressing her palm against the plastic barrier that separated her from Michael, the firstborn, by 2 minutes. "They may be small, but they're already showing their personalities," said Dr. Lin, the neonatologist. "This one here," she pointed to Michael, "keeps pulling out his temperature probe, a real fighter. The middle one stays calm during procedures, and this little guy," she gestured to Mason, "cries when his brothers do, even though they're in separate incubators. They're connected." For the next 3 weeks, Emma lived in the NICU. The community house held her bed, understanding that a mother's place was with her children. She slept in a recliner chair that never fully reclined, waking at every alarm, every nurse's footstep. The routine of the NICU became her world. Morning rounds, afternoon assessments, evening medication adjustments, midnight weighing. Slowly, the boys gained ounces, their skin thickening, their lungs strengthening. Emma learned medical terminology she'd never imagined needing: bradycardia, apnea monitors, gavage feeding, kangaroo care. When they reached 3 pounds each, she was allowed to hold them, one at a time, for 20 minutes each, their fragile bodies nestled against her bare chest to share body heat and heartbeats. "You're doing an amazing job," said Nurse Eliza, who had taken a special interest in Emma's case. "Many parents can't be here around the clock like you are. It makes a difference." "I don't have anywhere else to be," Emma admitted. "They're all I have." By the 5th week, Emma had developed a system. She'd meticulously labeled each baby with color-coded wristbands: blue for Michael, green for Matthew, red for Mason, and created a detailed spreadsheet on a borrowed tablet, tracking every gram gained, every milliliter consumed, every minute of unassisted breathing. "This is impressive," remarked Dr. Lin, reviewing Emma's notes. "Have you considered a career in healthcare data management? Your organization skills are exceptional." Emma hadn't considered a career at all since discovering her pregnancy. She'd been too busy surviving. But the doctor's casual question planted a seed. Finally, after 47 days in the NICU, all 3 Sullivan boys were deemed stable enough for discharge. At 5 pounds each, they still seemed impossibly small to be leaving the security of round-the-clock medical care. Emma stood in the NICU hallway, surrounded by nurses who had become family, 3 car seats containing her sons arrayed before her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice breaking. "Take care of those boys and yourself," Dr. Lin replied. "And remember what I said about your data management skills. The medical field needs people who can think systematically." The transition from hospital to community house was jarring. The constant beeping of monitors was replaced by the cacophony of 3 newborns crying in discord. Emma's carefully constructed NICU schedule collapsed under the reality of being solely responsible for 3 infants around the clock. The first night home, all 3 babies woke simultaneously, each wailing with increasing urgency as Emma frantically tried to prepare bottles with shaking hands. Panic rose in her throat as Mason's face turned alarming shades of red. Michael arched his back in hunger-fueled rage, and Matthew's hiccuping sobs seemed to physically pain him. "I can't do this," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face as she cradled Mason while using her foot to rock Matthew's bassinet. "I can't do this alone." As if in response, Mason's tiny hand gripped her finger with surprising strength. His eyes, now open and alert at 2 months old, though still 6 weeks premature, adjusted, seemed to focus on her face. The simple human connection steadied her. Emma took a deep breath, then another. "Okay, system," she said aloud. "I need a system." By morning, Emma had devised a rotating schedule for feeding, changing, and comforting. Colored sticky notes marked each baby's last feeding and changing. A timer helped her track the precious few minutes between caretaking sessions when she might shower or eat. It wasn't perfect, but it created enough order to keep her from drowning. Over the next weeks, Emma and the triplets settled into their new normal. The community house residents pitched in when they could, holding a baby while Emma showered, folding tiny laundry while she napped. But the bulk of care fell to her alone, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. During rare, quiet moments when all 3 babies slept simultaneously, Emma found herself drawn back to Dr. Lin's comment about data management. Using the community house's shared computer during off hours, she researched programs for single mothers returning to education. The search led her to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's special scholarship for underrepresented students in STEM fields, with a specific pathway for single parents. Late one night, after settling the triplets for their longest stretch of sleep, Emma borrowed the house manager's laptop. With Mason nestled against her chest in a worn baby carrier, she filmed a short video application for the MIT program. "My name is Emma Sullivan," she whispered to avoid waking the babies. "I'm 22 years old and the single mother of triplet boys born 8 weeks ago. Before their birth, I was told I lacked the education, connections, and value to succeed in a competitive world. I'm applying to MIT to prove that assumption wrong, not just for myself, but for my 3 sons, who deserve a mother who refused to accept limitations placed on her by others. 2 weeks later, Emma sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, all 3 babies arranged in a semicircle of cushions before her. Michael batted at a homemade mobile made from origami paper cranes. Matthew studied his own hands with intense concentration. Mason seemed content watching his brothers, already showing signs of the emotional intelligence that would define him. "You are intelligent," Emma told them, beginning the affirmation ritual she'd created. "You are strong. You are loved." A knock at the door interrupted their moment. The house manager entered holding an official-looking envelope. "This came for you," she said, handing it to Emma. "It's from MIT." Emma's hands trembled as she opened the letter, scanning its contents with disbelief. "I got in," she whispered. "Full scholarship, housing allowance, childcare subsidy for the campus daycare." She looked up, tears blurring her vision. "They accepted all 4 of us." On her last night in the community house, Emma packed their few belongings into donated duffel bags. The women who had become her surrogate family gathered to say goodbye, each offering small gifts: hand-knitted booties, a jar of homemade baby food, a book of nursery rhymes. "You come back and show us when you famous scientist," Louisa said, embracing Emma fiercely. "Show these babies what their mama accomplish." The bus ride to Cambridge the next morning drew curious stares from other passengers. A young woman traveling alone with triplet infants was an unusual sight. Some offered help, others judgment disguised as concern. Emma focused on keeping her sons calm, whispering their affirmations as the city landscape changed outside the windows. The MIT campus bustled with brilliant minds rushing between classes. Students with laptops and complex conversations paused to watch as Emma navigated the path to her assigned housing, pushing the triple stroller with one hand, dragging their bags with the other. The family housing unit was small, a studio with a kitchenette and tiny bathroom, but it was clean, safe, and theirs alone. Emma placed the triplets on the single bed, arranging pillows to keep them from rolling off, and began unpacking their meager possessions. As she hung tiny thrift store onesies in the closet, a sense of possibility washed over her. The small algorithms she would write between nighttime feedings and diaper changes, the lines of code tapped out while her sons napped against her chest, would one day form the foundation of a technological revolution worth billions, though she couldn't possibly know it yet. The tiny algorithms Emma would write between nighttime feedings and diaper changes would indeed become the foundation of something extraordinary, though the path ahead would test every ounce of her determination. Her first morning at MIT dawned cruelly early, at precisely 5 o'clock, when Michael's hungry cries pierced the pre-dawn stillness of their studio apartment. Emma's eyes snapped open, her body responding before her mind fully awakened. She'd slept in her clothes, a practical decision that saved precious minutes. Navigating the dimly lit room, she prepared bottles with practiced efficiency, the motions so familiar she could perform them half asleep. "Good morning, little mathematician," she whispered to Michael, whose tiny fingers grasped at air as she lifted him. Matthew and Mason stirred in response to their brother's cries, their circadian rhythms synchronized like perfectly calibrated instruments. By 5:30, all 3 boys were fed and changed, their color-coded bassinets, blue, green, and red, neatly arranged beside the small desk where Emma reviewed her introduction to computer science notes. The campus daycare wouldn't open until 7:30, giving her this quiet interlude to absorb complex concepts that would have challenged her even without the fog of perpetual exhaustion. "Binary search trees," she murmured, gently rocking Mason's bassinet with her foot while highlighting key passages. "Divide and conquer algorithms." At 7:15, Emma orchestrated the morning migration. 3 infants secured in the triple stroller, diaper bag packed with military precision, student ID and building access card clipped to her lanyard. The route from family housing to the campus daycare had been carefully timed. 8 minutes at normal pace, 12 with unexpected diaper emergencies. "Sullivan Triplets," announced Emma to the daycare director, a kind-faced woman named Meredith who had taken special interest in their unusual situation. "Good morning, boys," Meredith cooed, helping transfer the infants to their designated cribs. Professor Harding called to check they'd arrived safely. "He mentioned you were nearly late to his lecture yesterday." Emma's cheeks flushed. Mason had a doctor's appointment. The pediatrician was running behind. "Emma," Meredith's voice softened, "you're doing something most people couldn't imagine attempting. It's okay to ask for accommodations." "I don't want special treatment," Emma replied, straightening her second-hand blazer. "I need to prove I belong here on merit alone." The walk across campus to her first lecture became a daily meditation. These precious minutes alone were her only respite. Fall in Cambridge painted the academic buildings in burnished gold and crimson, a beauty Emma barely had time to notice as she mentally rehearsed algorithms and data structures. In the vast lecture hall of Introduction to Computational Thinking, Emma sat alone in the back row, near the door for quick exits if the daycare called. Around her, fresh-faced undergraduates chatted about weekend parties and internship opportunities, their conversations a foreign language to her. "Today we'll discuss efficiency in sorting algorithms," Professor Harding announced, his voice echoing through the hall. Emma fought to keep her eyes open, the gentle rocking motion she'd been doing for hours with Mason having lulled her body into a dangerous readiness for sleep. She pinched her wrist hard under the desk, the sharp pain a temporary remedy for exhaustion. "Miss Sullivan," Professor Harding's voice cut through her fog, "perhaps you can explain why quicksort might be preferable to merge sort in certain applications." All eyes turned toward her. Emma straightened, adrenaline clearing her mind. "Quicksort uses less memory than merge sort because it sorts in place," she answered, her voice stronger than she felt. "While its worst-case performance is ON2, its average case is ON log n, making it efficient for most real-world applications where memory constraints exist." The professor nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Precisely, though I'd recommend staying awake for the nuances we're about to discuss." Scattered laughter rippled through the hall. Emma's face burned, but she held her chin high. She might be the only student who'd been awake since 5 a.m. caring for triplets, but she wouldn't use that as an excuse. After classes ended at 4, while other students headed to study groups or coffee shops, Emma raced back to the daycare, arriving precisely at 4:15 to find all 3 boys fussy and overtired. "They missed their afternoon nap," explained the caregiver apologetically. "Sometimes they seem to feed off each other's energy." The evening routine unfolded like a complex dance, feeding 3 hungry infants while attempting to review calculus theorems, bathing tiny bodies in the small sink while mentally cataloging programming syntax, singing lullabies while highlighting textbook passages with her free hand. By 9 p.m., when the triplets finally settled into their longest sleep stretch, Emma's real work began. Sitting cross-legged on her bed, laptop balanced precariously on a pillow, she coded through the night hours, earbuds in place to hear any stirring from the bassinets. "If I reduce this loop complexity," she muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard, "the algorithm runs 17% faster." Her first programming assignment, a simple inventory management system, had evolved into something more complex. Unable to stop at the basic requirements, Emma had added predictive analytics that could forecast when supplies would run low based on historical usage patterns. When Professor Landry returned the graded assignments, his comment on Emma's stood out: "Exceptional work. See me after class." With Michael fighting a cold, Emma had almost skipped the meeting, but curiosity won out. She arrived at Professor Landry's office with all 3 boys in tow, having been unable to find a last-minute sitter. "I'm so sorry," she began, seeing his surprise at the triple stroller. "Matthew has separation anxiety if I leave them with strangers, and Michael needs his medicine in 30 minutes. To her shock, Professor Landry smiled. "I have 5 children myself. May I?" He reached toward Michael, who studied the professor with solemn eyes before allowing himself to be lifted. "Your algorithm for predicting resource depletion," Landry continued, bouncing Michael gently, "has applications far beyond a simple inventory system. Have you considered its use in healthcare settings?" Emma blinked, surprised by both his ease with her son and the unexpected question. "For medical supplies, you mean? For treatment protocols, patient flow, predictive diagnostics?" He handed Michael back and turned to his computer. "The hospital system wastes millions annually on inefficient resource allocation. Your approach could help optimize critical care procedures." That conversation planted a seed that would grow throughout her first year. Between classes and childcare, Emma refined her algorithm, applying it to sample hospital data Professor Landry provided. Each improvement came between diaper changes and feedings, coded in the precious minutes when all 3 boys napped simultaneously. Winter arrived with brutal efficiency, bringing with it the triplets' first Christmas and a series of respiratory infections that cycled between them with clockwork precision. As snow piled against the small windows of their studio apartment, Emma fought her own battle against exhaustion and isolation. On a particularly brutal January night, with Mason's fever spiking to 103 degrees, Matthew's ear infection causing piercing screams, and Michael's cough preventing any possibility of sleep, Emma reached her breaking point. "I can't," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held Mason in the steamy bathroom, trying to clear his congested lungs while the other boys wailed from the main room. "I just can't do this anymore." The next morning, bleary-eyed and defeated, Emma missed Professor Chen's advanced algorithms lecture for the 3rd time that month. Instead of sending the standard absence notification, she received a personal email. "Miss Sullivan, please see me in my office today at 3 p.m. This is not a request." Emma arrived at Professor Chen's office with all 3 feverish infants, expecting academic probation. Instead, she found the stern professor had rearranged her furniture to accommodate the stroller. "You're failing my class," Professor Chen stated without preamble. "I know," Emma replied, too exhausted for excuses. "The boys have been sick, and you're still in the top 5% of algorithmically minded students I've encountered in 30 years of teaching," Professor Chen interrupted, "which makes this situation unacceptable." She slid a folder across the desk. "I've arranged an extension on your projects. Additionally, the computer science department has a small emergency fund for exceptional students facing hardship. It will cover a part-time caregiver for 20 hours weekly." Emma's throat tightened. "I don't need charity." "This isn't charity," Professor Chen replied sharply. "This is investment in intellectual capital. Your work on optimizing hospital systems shows remarkable promise. The department simply can't afford to lose your contribution because of logistical challenges." That night, with the boys finally sleeping after their medication, Emma returned to her optimization algorithm with renewed purpose. If Professor Chen believed her work valuable enough to invest in, perhaps it truly could make a difference. Spring semester brought improvement. With 20 hours of childcare assistance weekly, Emma could attend all her classes and even participate in a research group focused on computational applications in healthcare. The triplets, now approaching their first birthday, developed distinct personalities that made their care both easier and more complex. During late-night coding sessions, Emma occasionally brought the boys to the computer lab, setting them on blankets beside her workstation where they played with specially designed toys that introduced basic mathematical concepts. Michael, already showing remarkable pattern recognition, would arrange wooden blocks in complex symmetrical designs. Matthew solved simple puzzles with focused determination, while Mason seemed more interested in watching how others approached problems. It was during one such late-night session that Emma made her breakthrough. Staring at cell samples projected on her monitor, part of a cancer research database Professor Landry had granted her access to, she noticed patterns that the current diagnostic algorithms missed. "The cells don't just exist as individual anomalies," she murmured, Mason sleeping against her chest in his carrier. "They create relationship networks, micro-communities of aberrant behavior." For 3 consecutive nights, Emma refined her observation into a detection algorithm that identified cancerous patterns 47% earlier than standard protocols by analyzing cellular relationships rather than individual cell morphology. When she presented her preliminary findings to a small group of professors, their exchanged glances told her everything. This wasn't just a clever student project, it was potentially revolutionary. "Ms. Sullivan," said Professor Landry after her presentation, "what you've developed here could save thousands of lives by enabling earlier intervention. Have you considered patenting this approach?" Emma looked down at the triplets, now sleeping in their stroller after sitting remarkably quietly through her presentation, Michael clutching a plastic molecule model, Matthew with a miniature stethoscope, and Mason with a worn teddy bear wearing a lab coat, all toys donated by the department faculty who had gradually adopted the Sullivan family. "I haven't thought beyond passing this course," she admitted. Professor Chen's normally stern expression softened. "Perhaps it's time to think bigger." As her first year at MIT drew to a close, Emma Sullivan had not only survived, she had excelled. Her GPA placed her among the top students despite her extraordinary circumstances. The algorithm she had developed between feedings and diaper changes had caught the attention of faculty beyond the computer science department, including researchers from the medical school. The small algorithm that Emma developed between trocas de fraldas and sleepless nights, invisible as she herself once felt, would become the foundation of a system that would one day save thousands of lives, and eventually place her face to face with the man who had said she would never be enough. The small algorithm that Emma developed between diaper changes and sleepless nights was about to catalyze a transformation she could scarcely imagine. As spring blossomed across the MIT campus, the buzz about her cancer detection innovations spread through academic circles like wildfire. What began as a class project had evolved into something with real-world implications, something that could save lives. On a crisp April morning, Emma arrived at the MIT Innovation Competition with the triplets in tow. Now 3 years old, Michael, Matthew, and Mason were dressed in identical navy sweaters, their dark hair neatly combed, their blue-gray eyes, so reminiscent of their absent father, alert and curious. Finding a babysitter for the most important presentation of her academic career had proved impossible, so Emma had spent hours practicing with the boys, teaching them to sit quietly, bribing them with promises of ice cream afterward. "Remember, this is Mommy's important day," she whispered as they entered the auditorium where judges and venture capitalists waited. "Just like we practiced." A student volunteer approached, looking uncertainly at the 3 toddlers. "The family seating area is—" "They're with me," Emma interrupted firmly. "I'm presenting." The volunteer's eyebrows shot up, but she merely nodded and directed them to the preparation area. Emma settled the boys in the front row with activity books and whispered instructions to Michael, the most responsible, to watch his brothers. When her name was called, Emma ascended the stage with steady steps despite her hammering heart. Her presentation outfit, a simple black dress purchased from a consignment shop, was a far cry from the designer clothes that once filled her closet during those 8 months with Blake. But as she faced the audience of academics and investors, her confidence came not from her attire, but from the elegance of her algorithm. "Cancer kills because we detect it too late," she began, her voice clear and strong. "My algorithm identifies cellular relationship networks rather than just individual anomalies, allowing for detection 47% earlier than current methods." Halfway through her presentation, a commotion erupted in the front row. Mason, the most emotionally attuned of the triplets, had escaped the volunteer who'd been watching them and was toddling determinedly toward the stage, arms outstretched toward his mother. The audience tittered. A judge frowned. Emma's heart sank. This could cost her everything. Without missing a beat, she scooped up Mason and balanced him on her hip. As I was saying, early detection translates directly to survival rates. When we identify these cellular patterns at stage 1 instead of stage 3, she adjusted Mason to her other hip as he played with her hair. Survival rates increase from 17% to over 90%. The potential catastrophe transformed into a powerful visual, a brilliant young mother holding her child while potentially revolutionizing cancer detection. By the time Emma concluded, the judges were leaning forward in their seats, and Mason had fallen asleep against her shoulder. 3 hours later, the announcement came. First prize in the Healthcare Innovation category goes to Emma Sullivan for Neural Network Approach to Early Cancer Detection. As she accepted the acrylic trophy with one hand, Mason still clinging to her and the other boys now joining them on stage, flashbulbs popped. The moment was captured in a video that would change everything. 2 weeks later, Emma was packing lunches for the Triplets' day at preschool when her student email pinged with a message that initially seemed like spam. Impressed by your innovation. Will be in Cambridge tomorrow. Would like to discuss investment potential. Lin Chen, Horizon Bio Investments. Emma nearly deleted it until a quick search revealed that Lin Chen was indeed a legitimate venture capitalist specializing in healthcare technology with a portfolio of successful medical startups. The prospect of actual funding made her hands shake as she replied, agreeing to meet at a campus coffee shop. The following afternoon, Emma arrived 15 minutes late, the triplets in tow, their faces still sticky from lunch despite her best efforts with wet wipes. The daycare had closed early for a water leak, leaving her no alternative but to bring them. She scanned the coffee shop anxiously, expecting to see an annoyed investor checking his watch. Instead, a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression was sitting in the corner, reading something on his tablet. When he spotted Emma and the boys, he stood and smiled. "Ms. Sullivan, I presume? Lin Chen? And these must be the young gentlemen who made such an impression in your presentation video." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm so sorry about this. The daycare closed unexpectedly, and I had no one to—" "Please," Lin interrupted, gesturing to the chairs. "No apologies necessary. I'm delighted to meet your whole team." To Emma's astonishment, Lin knelt to the children's level and produced a small wooden puzzle from his briefcase. "This is a traditional tangram from Taiwan, where I grew up. Would you like to try it?" While Matthew and Mason examined the puzzle pieces with interest, Michael immediately began arranging them into shapes with startling precision. Lin watched, eyebrows rising steadily as the 3-year-old completed configurations that would challenge many adults. "Remarkable," he murmured before turning to Emma. "Your algorithm is equally impressive. I believe it could transform early cancer detection if properly developed." Over the next hour, Lin outlined his investment philosophy while simultaneously engaging the triplets with mathematical games he seemed to produce endlessly from his briefcase. Unlike other professionals Emma had encountered who regarded her children as inconvenient obstacles, Lin treated them as integral to the conversation. "I believe technology that saves lives shouldn't be rushed to market prematurely," he explained, helping Mason with a particularly challenging puzzle piece. "My investment model allows for longer development cycles with less pressure for immediate commercialization. I'd like to offer you $500,000 as seed funding, with the condition that you continue refining your algorithm without the pressure of quarterly profit reports." Emma stared at him, certain she'd misheard. $500,000? Lin nodded. "With potential for Series A funding within 18 months depending on clinical validation results." "Why?" Emma asked bluntly. "There are hundreds of healthcare algorithms being developed by teams with PhDs and decades of experience. I'm a single mother who hasn't even completed her undergraduate degree." Lin's expression grew serious. "Because you solved a problem those teams have overlooked for years, and you did it while raising triplets and maintaining a near-perfect GPA. Imagine what you could accomplish with actual resources." He glanced at Michael, who had already solved the tangram and was now helping his brothers. "Besides, Exceptional minds clearly run in your family. After Lynn departed with promises of contracts to follow, Emma gathered the boys and walked in a daze to the nearest bathroom. Locking herself in a stall, she pressed her hands against her mouth and sobbed, not from sadness but from overwhelming relief. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, the crushing weight of financial insecurity lifted slightly from her shoulders. 3 weeks later, with Lynn's investment secured and initial paperwork signed, Emma stood in the doorway of their new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom unit in a safe neighborhood just off campus. The triplets raced from room to room, marveling at the space after years confined to a studio. "I have my own bed!" Michael exclaimed, bouncing experimentally on one of the 3 twin mattresses arranged in the children's bedroom. "Me too!" echoed Matthew and Mason in unison, each claiming their territory. Emma watched them, throat tight with emotion. Their joy at having individual beds, something most children took for granted, underscored how much they'd gone without. With Lynn's investment covering not just algorithm development, but also a living stipend, their lives were transforming in tangible ways. Perhaps the most significant change came with the hiring of Sophia, a graduate student in early childhood education who agreed to provide part-time childcare in exchange for reduced rent in their spare room. The arrangement gave Emma precious, uninterrupted hours for research while ensuring the boys had consistent care from someone they quickly came to adore. The guilt Emma felt at not being with her sons every moment was counterbalanced by the joy of watching them thrive with Sophia's dedicated attention. The extra room in their apartment became a small laboratory where Emma could work while the boys napped, equipped with basic but functional equipment purchased with Lynn's funding. One evening, as Emma tested tissue samples against the latest iteration of her algorithm, she discovered it could identify precancerous cells 47% earlier than conventional methods. She sat back, stunned by the implications. This wasn't just an academic exercise anymore. This was something that could change diagnostic medicine forever. As summer turned to fall, Lynn became a regular presence in their lives. He visited weekly to discuss progress, often staying for dinner and delighting the boys with stories of his childhood in Taiwan. His genuine interest in their development and respectful treatment of Emma's work created a comfortable dynamic unlike anything she'd experienced since the triplets' birth. On a cool October evening, Lynn arrived with a special delivery, a small laboratory centrifuge that would allow Emma to process samples more efficiently. "The boys helped me pick the color," he explained as Michael, Matthew, and Mason excitedly pointed out the bright blue casing they had selected. After the equipment was installed and the triplets were tucked into bed, Lynn and Emma sat at her small kitchen table reviewing test results. The casual comfort between them had evolved over months of collaboration, creating a foundation of mutual respect. "You've made remarkable progress," Lynn noted, studying the latest data. "The algorithm's accuracy has improved 12% since July." "It's still not perfect," Emma replied, absently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's a subset of tissue samples where the pattern recognition falters." "Progress isn't linear," Lynn reminded her. "Besides, you've accomplished in months what most research teams can't do in years." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted subtly in the air between them. Lynn cleared his throat and returned his attention to the data, but the moment lingered. That night, after Lynn departed, Emma found herself standing before the mirror, studying her reflection. The exhausted, desperate girl who had once slept in a bus station was gone. In her place stood a woman with purpose, surrounded by 3 brilliant children and supported by someone who valued her mind. While Emma signed her first investment contract, she could never have imagined that in 5 years she would be the one investing millions in promising startups, or that Lynn would become much more than a business partner to her and the boys. While Emma signed her first investment contract, she could never have imagined that in 5 years she would be the one investing millions in promising startups, or that Lynn would become much more than a business partner to her and the boys. The path from that moment to the founding of Sullivan Tech Innovations unfolded with the inevitability of a well-designed algorithm, each step building logically upon the last. On a bright spring morning 2 years after Lynn's initial investment, Emma stood in the Great Dome at MIT, her graduation cap slightly askew as the triplets, now 5 years old, fidgeted in their miniature suits in the front row. Professor Chen watched with uncharacteristic emotion as Emma Sullivan crossed the stage, summa cum laude, the department's highest-ranking computer science graduate despite having balanced motherhood with her studies. "Dr. Sullivan," Lynn whispered incorrectly but prophetically as she rejoined them after the ceremony, the boys immediately surrounding her in a tangle of small arms and excited chatter. "Not doctor yet," Emma corrected with a smile, "but someday, perhaps." Michael tugged at her graduation gown. "Can we see your office now, Mommy? The real one, not the school one." The real office was a modest rented space in a converted factory building in Cambridge. 2 rooms with high ceilings and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. Emma had signed the lease a week earlier, using a portion of Lynn's second round of funding after her algorithm had successfully completed initial validation trials at Massachusetts General Hospital. "Sullivan Tech Innovations," Emma read aloud as she hung the small engraved plaque beside the door. The triplets stood solemnly beside her, understanding in their precocious way that this moment marked a significant threshold. Mason, always the most emotionally intuitive, slipped his hand into hers. "Are you happy, Mommy?" Emma knelt to his level, meeting 3 identical sets of blue-gray eyes that still sometimes caused her heart to stutter with their resemblance to Blake's. "Very happy. We're building something important together." The early days of Sullivan Tech unfolded in a blur of activity. Emma conducted interviews at a salvaged conference table while the boys colored quietly in the corner, occasionally looking up to assess each candidate with uncanny perception. "The lady with red hair talks too fast," Matthew observed after one interview. She didn't finish her thoughts. "The man with glasses listened when you talked," Mason added. "I liked him." Their insights proved remarkably accurate. Emma's first 3 hires formed the cornerstone of what would become an industry-leading team. Raj, a brilliant programmer with expertise in neural networks. Sophia, who transitioned from nanny to the company's bioinformatics specialist after completing her graduate work. And Tanya, an administrative assistant whose organizational skills rivaled Emma's own. The transformation of Emma's algorithm from academic project to commercial diagnostic tool advanced steadily. Each improvement came through methodical testing and refinement, with Emma often working late into the night after the boys were asleep. One such evening, as she pored over test results showing a 14% improvement in early detection rates, a soft knock interrupted her concentration. Lynn stood in the doorway, takeout containers in hand. "You missed dinner," he said simply, setting the food on her desk. The boys were worried. Emma stretched, realizing suddenly that she'd been hunched over her computer for hours. "What time is it?" "Nearly 11. Sophia put them to bed, but Michael insisted I check on you before I left." Something in Lynn's expression, a warmth beyond professional concern, caught Emma's attention. Their partnership had evolved over the past years into deep friendship, but lately, she'd sensed a shift in their dynamic. "You didn't have to wait," she said, opening a container of fragrant curry. "I wanted to." Lynn sat across from her, his normally composed demeanor slightly uncertain. "Emma, we've been working together for nearly 3 years now. I've watched you build something extraordinary, both with this company and with your sons." Emma set down her fork, suddenly aware of where this conversation might be heading. "The boys adore you," she said carefully. "And I them." Lynn paused. "And their mother." The words hung between them, simple yet profound in their implications. Emma thought of Blake, of the devastating rejection that had once shattered her world. The fear of trusting again warred with the undeniable fact that Lynn had proven himself trustworthy in ways Blake never had. 2 months later, on a perfect autumn afternoon, Emma and Lynn shared their first dinner date without the triplets. The restaurant was elegant in a way that once would have intimidated her, but Emma moved through the space with newfound confidence, her simple black dress a choice rather than a limitation. "You look beautiful," Lynn said as they were seated, his normally methodical demeanor softened by genuine admiration. "This feels strange," Emma admitted. "Being somewhere nice without 3 small tornadoes destroying everything?" Lynn laughed. "They're extraordinary tornadoes, though." The evening flowed with surprising ease. They discussed the company's growth, the boys' development, and eventually, more personal matters. Lynn's childhood in Taiwan, Emma's dreams before life took its unexpected turn. Neither mentioned Blake directly, though his shadow lingered in the careful way Lynn approached the subject of the boys' parentage. "They have your resilience," he observed, "and your analytical minds." "And someone else's eyes," Emma acknowledged, the first time she'd referenced their biological father to Lynn. "Someone who didn't want them." Lynn covered her hand with his. "His profound loss, my potential gain if you'll allow it." The relationship progressed with the same thoughtful deliberation that characterized both their professional approaches. Lynn integrated seamlessly into their family routine, never pushing for more than Emma was ready to give, always treating the triplets with genuine respect for their intelligence and individuality. The proposal, when it came, was characteristically considerate. Lynn arrived at their apartment one Sunday morning carrying a box of specialized building blocks designed for advanced spatial reasoning, the latest educational tool he'd discovered for the boys. As Michael, Matthew, and Mason eagerly constructed increasingly complex structures on the living room floor, Lynn turned to them with unusual solemnity. "I have an important question for you 3, he said, kneeling to their level. "I would like to ask your mother to marry me, but as you are the most important people in her life, I wanted your permission first." The boys exchanged their typical telepathic glances, a silent communication that had fascinated developmental psychologists since infancy. Michael, always the spokesman, answered first. "Will you still help me with my robot designs?" "Of course." Matthew tilted his head. "Will you live here with us all the time?" "If your mother agrees, yes." Mason, the emotional barometer, asked the most important question. "Do you love Mommy? Really love her, not pretend?" Lynn's expression softened. "Very much, and I love all of you too." 3 solemn nods sealed the agreement. The wedding took place in the Cambridge Botanical Gardens on a perfect spring day. Emma wore a simple ivory dress, her chestnut hair adorned with small white flowers. The triplets served as ring-bearers, unusually subdued in their understanding of the day's significance. Only close friends attended, professors who had supported Emma through her MIT years, colleagues from Sullivan Tech, and Lynn's small circle of trusted associates. During the intimate reception, Professor Chen raised a toast. "To Emma, who has redefined what's possible, and to Lynn, who had the wisdom to recognize extraordinary potential where others failed to see it." Emma caught Lynn's eye across the garden, thinking how different this felt from the fantasy future she'd once imagined with Blake. This wasn't a fairy tale or a rescue. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine admiration. 2 months after the wedding, the Sullivan-Chen family attended another significant ceremony, the formal adoption of the triplets by Lynn. As they left the courthouse, the boys proudly carrying their new certificates declaring them legally Michael, Matthew, and Mason Sullivan-Chen, Lynn hoisted all 3 onto his shoulders for an impromptu parade down the courthouse steps. "Is it official now?" Mason asked. "You're really our dad?" "On paper, yes," Lynn answered. "But in my heart, you've been my sons since I first saw you solving puzzles most adults couldn't complete." The Sullivan Tech Innovations offices expanded as the company grew. With 10 employees now occupying a larger space in a renovated textile mill, Emma balanced the rapid business development with her commitment to the triplets' education and well-being. The breakthrough that would transform Sullivan Tech from promising startup to healthcare industry disruptor came on an ordinary Tuesday. Emma was presenting her diagnostic system to administrators at Massachusetts General Hospital, her voice steady as she explained the neural network's ability to detect cellular abnormalities long before conventional methods. The algorithm identifies relationship patterns between cells rather than simply flagging individual anomalies, she explained, the triplets sitting quietly in the back of the conference room with educational tablets, a compromise when childcare fell through at the last minute. The chief oncologist leaned forward. "And you're claiming a 47% earlier detection rate?" "49% in the latest trials," Emma corrected, with false positives below 3%. 2 weeks later, at 3:15 in the morning, Emma's phone rang. Dr. Sarah Williams, the attending physician who had been first to implement the Sullivan system, spoke with barely contained excitement. "Your algorithm found something we would have missed. A 29-year-old patient with unusual cellular patterns that wouldn't have flagged in our standard screening for at least 8 months. We've confirmed early-stage lymphoma that's completely treatable at this phase. You saved a life today." Emma sat on the edge of her bed in the darkness, Lynn stirring beside her as she processed the news. This wasn't an academic exercise or a business milestone. This was real. A young person who would live because of what she had built between diaper changes and sleepless nights. As Sullivan Tech gained recognition in medical circles, the offers began. First from medical equipment manufacturers wanting to integrate her system, then from pharmaceutical companies eager to acquire the technology outright. Emma rejected them all, despite the impressive numbers involved. $300 million for 51% stake, Lynn noted, reviewing the latest offer. It's substantial. Emma shook her head. We don't sell control of our purpose. By the time the triplets turned 7, Sullivan Tech had expanded to 15 employees and held contracts with 11 major hospitals across New England. The company moved again, this time to a purpose-built facility with dedicated research labs and a small educational space for the triplets and the children of other employees. On the day they hung the company sign at their new headquarters, Emma stood with Lynn and the boys, looking up at the simple blue letters that represented her unlikely journey from abandoned pregnant waitress to healthcare technology innovator. "We built something beautiful together," Lynn said softly, watching the boys race each other around the perimeter of the new building. On the day she closed her 10th hospital contract, Emma couldn't have predicted that in just 3 years her marriage with Lynn would amicably end, but that the true family they had built, Sullivan Tech, would be poised to become a force that even Blake Montgomery couldn't ignore. On the day she closed her 10th hospital contract, Emma couldn't have predicted that in just 3 years her marriage with Lynn would amicably end, but that the true family they had built, Sullivan Tech, would be poised to become a force that even Blake Montgomery couldn't ignore. The first signs appeared on a quiet Sunday morning when Emma found Lynn sitting alone on their back porch, staring at the garden where the triplets, now 8 years old, were conducting what they called a botanical intelligence experiment, essentially talking to plants to see if emotional stimuli affected growth rates. "They're remarkable," Lynn said as Emma handed him a cup of tea. "Mason has already designed a control methodology that would impress graduate students." Emma settled beside him, sensing something beneath his admiration. "What's on your mind? You've been quiet all week." Lynn's fingers tightened around his cup. "I've been offered the chance to lead Horizon's new biotech initiative in Singapore. 6 months minimum, possibly a year." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Emma studied his profile, noting the subtle tension in his jaw, the look he got when torn between conflicting priorities. "You should take it," she said finally. "It's an incredible opportunity." Lynn turned to her, surprise evident. "The boys, we'll miss you terribly but understand video calls and would benefit from experiencing your culture firsthand during school breaks." Emma covered his hand with hers. "We'll make it work." But as the weeks of separation stretched into months, something shifted subtly in their relationship. Their video calls remained warm, full of updates about the boys' achievements and Sullivan Tech's expanding reach, yet a strange formality crept in, as though they were performing the roles of husband and wife rather than truly inhabiting them. When Lynn returned for a 2-week visit after 4 months away, the awkwardness became impossible to ignore. They moved around each other with careful politeness, their physical intimacy reduced to perfunctory kisses and brief embraces that felt more like obligation than desire. On his final night before returning to Singapore after the boys were asleep, Lynn and Emma sat in their living room, the silence between them no longer comfortable. "I think we need to have an honest conversation," Lynn began, his usual precision giving way to uncharacteristic hesitation. "About us." Emma nodded, a curious sense of relief washing over her. "We're better partners than spouses, aren't we?" Lynn's expression softened with recognition. "You feel it too." "I love you," Emma said simply. "But not in the way a wife should love a husband, and you deserve that kind of love." "As do you." Lynn reached for her hand. "The boys will always be your sons," Emma finished firmly. "That doesn't change, regardless of our marital status." The conversation that followed was painful, yet liberating. They acknowledged that their relationship had been built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than romantic passion, qualities that made for excellent business partners and co-parents, but not necessarily lifelong lovers. The following morning, Emma gathered the triplets in their living room for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. At 8 years old, they were startlingly perceptive, their emotional intelligence outpacing even their considerable intellectual abilities. "Dad and I have decided to separate," she began, watching their identical expressions shift from confusion to concern. "This doesn't mean we don't care about each other or about you. Sometimes people love each other in different ways, but our family doesn't change." Michael, analytical as always, asked the practical questions. Would Dad still live nearby? Would they still see him regularly? Would they need to change schools? Matthew examined the emotional dynamics, wondering if they had caused the separation by being too demanding. Mason, his empathy almost painful in its intensity, asked simply, "Are you sad, Mommy?" Emma answered each question honestly, emphasizing that Lynn would remain a constant in their lives, just in a slightly different configuration. "Your father will always be your father," she assured them. "Nothing changes that." Lynn moved into an apartment 10 minutes away, appearing for dinner 3 times weekly as though nothing fundamental had changed in their family structure. The boys adjusted with the resilience that had characterized them since birth, creating elaborate schedules to ensure equitable time with both parents. Meanwhile, Sullivan Tech expanded at a pace that sometimes left Emma breathless. The company reached 200 employees, with offices in Boston, New York, and a small satellite location in California's emerging biotech corridor. Their diagnostic technology had been implemented in 73 hospitals nationwide, saving countless lives through early detection. The day Emma hired her 100th employee, she gathered the rapidly growing team in their headquarters atrium for an impromptu address. Sullivan Tech was born from necessity, she told them, standing confidently before people who now depended on her vision for their livelihoods. But it continues through purpose. We don't just build algorithms here, we build second chances. Every life extended through early detection is someone's parent, child, friend. Never forget that our code has consequences beyond the screen. As the company expanded, so did the triplets' extraordinary talents. Michael, approaching his 9th birthday, appeared in Emma's home office one evening clutching a tablet, his expression a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Mom, I made something," he said, handing her the device, "for kids like us." On the screen was a simple but elegant application, a digital tutoring system that adapted to users' learning patterns, identifying strengths and gently reinforcing areas of weakness. Michael had coded it himself, using the programming basics Emma and Lynn had taught him. "I call it Mind Match," he explained, watching nervously as Emma explored the interface. It's for kids who learn differently, like how Matthew gets frustrated with writing but can solve equations instantly, or how Mason understands people's feelings better than textbooks. Emma looked up at her son, throat tight with emotion. Michael, this is extraordinary. 2 months later, Matthew brought home the first-place trophy from the National Mathematics Olympiad, his typically serious expression replaced with quiet pride as photographers from the local paper captured the Sullivan-Chen family celebrating his victory. The headline the following day read, "Local prodigy defeats high school competitors at age 9. Not to be outdone, Mason developed his own project, a communication system using simplified symbols combined with predictive text that allowed nonverbal autistic children to express complex thoughts through tablet interfaces. He'd created it after befriending a classmate who struggled with traditional speech. He knows what he wants to say, Mason explained earnestly when presenting his invention at the school science fair. His brain just can't make the words come out right. This helps bridge the gap. Watching her sons flourish, each in their unique way, Emma felt a profound sense of vindication. These were the children Blake Montgomery had dismissed as a problem to be solved with a $10,000 check. These were the lives he had deemed unworthy of his name or attention. Their success became her most potent response to his cruelty, not orchestrated for revenge, but powerful in its refutation of his judgment nonetheless. The company's growth attracted attention from larger entities eager to acquire innovative healthcare technology. When the CEO of Meditech Incorporated offered $300 million for 51% of Sullivan Tech, Emma didn't even pretend to consider it. "We're not interested in selling controlling interest," she informed him during a lunch meeting at Boston's most exclusive restaurant, the same establishment where Blake had once taken her, making her feel hopelessly out of place. Now she sat comfortably in designer clothing she could easily afford, declining offers from people who once would have intimidated her. "Ms. Sullivan-Chen, this is a generous offer," the CEO persisted. "Most founders would jump at this valuation." Emma smiled politely. "I didn't build this company to sell it. I built it to change healthcare outcomes. Our independence ensures we maintain that mission." As Sullivan Tech's influence grew, Emma established a youth division specifically for the projects her sons and their academically gifted friends were developing. She hired dedicated mentors for each boy, recognizing their distinct talents required specialized guidance. Michael's application development accelerated under the tutelage of a former Google engineer. Matthew's mathematical abilities flourished with mentorship from an MIT professor who had once taught Emma. Mason's empathy-driven innovations benefited from the guidance of a developmental psychologist specializing in communication disorders. The boy's 10th birthday coincided with Sullivan Tech's expansion to international markets. Lin, whose business connections in Asia proved invaluable, orchestrated meetings with hospital administrators in Tokyo, Seoul, and Taipei. The celebration dinner afterward featured 3 identical cakes, each designed to reflect the distinct personalities of the triplets who were growing more individual by the day despite their identical appearances. "To the Sullivan-Chen innovations of the next decade," Lin toasted, raising his glass to the boys, "may they continue to improve lives around the world." 2 months later, the Sullivan Youth Division officially launched with its own dedicated office space within the company's growing campus. The triplets, despite their young age, were given appropriate titles and responsibilities, with adult supervision and structured limitations to ensure their education remained prioritized. Their first product, Michael's Mind-Match learning system, generated $17 million in revenue in its first year after being adopted by educational institutions nationwide. Matthew's mathematical models helped optimize hospital resource allocation during seasonal illness surges. Mason's communication system was implemented in 300 schools for special needs students. The fall of their 11th year brought another milestone, the groundbreaking for Sullivan Tech's permanent headquarters in Palo Alto, California. Emma had decided to relocate the company's main operations to Silicon Valley, recognizing the advantages of proximity to technology's epicenter. The ceremony featured the triplets cutting the ribbon together, their identical blue-gray eyes, Blake's eyes, serious with the understanding of what their mother had built. On the flight back to Boston, as the boys sketched new ideas on their tablets, Emma scrolled through news updates on her phone. A notification made her pause. Blake Montgomery had been named the new president of the National Association of Business Development, his perfectly composed face smiling from the screen as he promised to foster innovation and entrepreneurship across all sectors. While the Sullivan Tech expanded globally and her sons flourished as innovators in their own right, Emma didn't know that a seemingly routine letter inviting her to be the keynote speaker at a prestigious conference in New York would soon set in motion the meeting she had secretly rehearsed in her mind for 15 years. While the Sullivan Tech expanded globally and her sons flourished as innovators in their own right, Emma didn't know that a seemingly routine letter inviting her to be the keynote speaker at a prestigious conference in New York would soon set in motion the meeting she had secretly rehearsed in her mind for 15 years. The invitation arrived on embossed stationery one Tuesday morning, hand-delivered to Emma's minimalist office overlooking the Palo Alto Mountains. Her assistant, Vivian, placed it on her desk alongside the morning's priority emails and financial reports. The National Association of Business Development requests your presence as keynote speaker at their annual gala, Vivian summarized. It's quite prestigious. CEOs, venture capitalists, industry leaders. Emma opened the envelope, scanning the formal language until her eyes caught on the signature. Blake Montgomery, President, NABD. Her fingers stilled on the heavy paper, a strange electricity running through her body. The event is at the Plaza Hotel in New York, Vivian continued, checking her tablet. They're offering a substantial honorarium and covering all expenses. Who's the primary sponsor this year? Emma asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the thundering of her heart. Vivian tapped through several screens. Let me see. Montgomery Enterprises is the primary sponsor. Blake Montgomery became president of the association last quarter. She glanced up curiously. I don't believe you two have met, have you? Emma's gaze drifted to the wall of windows, where she could see the reflection of her 15-year-old sons crossing the Sullivan Tech campus. Even from this distance, their height, the set of their shoulders, and the precise way they moved marked them as extraordinary young men, and unmistakably Blake Montgomery's biological children. Not personally, Emma replied with a calculated smile, but it will be interesting to finally meet him. That evening, Emma stood in the doorway of her home office, watching the triplets hunched over their advanced physics homework at the dining table. At 15, they had grown tall, nearly 6 feet already, with the same chiseled features and storm-gray eyes that had once captivated her across a crowded bistro. Their dark hair fell in identical waves, though styled slightly differently to reflect their individual preferences. Michael, always the leader, looked up first. Mom, you've been standing there for 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Is everything wrong? Emma smiled at his precision. Not wrong. I need to speak with you all about something important. The boys exchanged glances, that silent communication they'd perfected since infancy, and simultaneously closed their textbooks. They followed her into the office, arranging themselves on the leather sofa while Emma took the chair opposite. You know that Lynn is not your biological father, she began. I've always been honest about that. 3 identical nods greeted her statement. She'd never hidden the truth from them, though she'd been selective about the details of Blake's rejection, softening the cruelty to protect them from feeling unwanted. Next week in New York, there's a possibility you might see your biological father for the first time. He doesn't know about you. He never wanted to know. Michael, analytical as always, leaned forward. Are you going to tell him about us? Emma smiled, the expression containing 15 years of carefully banked determination. I won't need to. Anyone who looks at you will know immediately. Matthew, the mathematician, tilted his head. Statistical probability suggests he's seen our photographs in news coverage of Sullivan Tech innovations. Why hasn't he made the connection? People often see what they expect to see, Emma explained. He believes I terminated the pregnancy. He never imagined there were 3 of you, or that you would look so much like him. Mason, eternally the emotional compass of the group, studied his mother's face. This isn't random timing, is it? You've been monitoring his career trajectory. Emma nodded, impressed as always by Mason's perception. I've kept track of his business activities. Montgomery Enterprises has been overextended recently. 3 unsuccessful hotel acquisitions and a failed expansion into luxury cruises. Their stock is vulnerable. Michael's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The Sullivan Holding Company's recent acquisitions, those weren't just diversification strategies. Not entirely, Emma acknowledged. Our financial team has been accumulating Montgomery Enterprises stock through anonymous shell companies for the past 18 months. We now control nearly 22% of their shares. The triplets exchanged another 3-way glance, their expressions shifting in near-perfect synchronization from surprise to appreciation of the strategic brilliance. You're planning to announce this at the conference, Matthew deduced, already calculating the financial implications. The timing seems optimal, Emma confirmed. The quarterly reports released the day before my keynote address. Mason stood and moved to the window, his reflection superimposed against the darkening Palo Alto skyline. This isn't about revenge, is it? Because we don't need him to validate our existence. Emma joined her son at the window, resting her hand on his shoulder. The same height now, they stood eye to eye. This isn't about revenge, it's about correction. He made assertions about my value, my capabilities, and my future that were fundamentally wrong. I'm simply providing empirical evidence to the contrary. The following morning, Emma gathered her executive team in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the Sullivan Tech campus. The room fell silent as she outlined her strategy regarding Montgomery Enterprises. Our financial analysis confirms they're over-leveraged in 3 markets, she explained, gesturing to the projection displaying their competitors' weaknesses. Their board meeting next Monday will likely result in a desperate search for capital infusion. Sanjay, her chief financial officer, nodded in agreement. Their debt-to-equity ratio is unsustainable. They need a white knight investor. Which is where we come in, Emma continued. Sullivan Holdings will announce our acquisition of an additional 4% of Montgomery shares on Wednesday morning, bringing our total ownership to 26%, making us their largest single shareholder. The team exchanged glances, recognizing the boldness of the move. Claire, the head of legal, leaned forward. The timing aligns perfectly with your keynote address at the NABD Gala. Emma nodded. The announcement will be made precisely 15 minutes before I take the stage. After the meeting, Emma returned to her office to find Lynn waiting, his expression serious. Though divorced for years, they maintained not only a business relationship but a deep friendship. He remained the triplets' legal father and a trusted advisor to both Emma and Sullivan Tech. Vivian mentioned the NABD invitation, he said without preamble. Blake Montgomery's event. Emma met his gaze steadily. Yes. Lynn studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. Are you certain this is the right approach? You've built something extraordinary without him ever acknowledging you or the boys. This isn't about needing his acknowledgement, Emma replied, settling into the chair behind her desk. It's about completing a circle. 15 years ago, he made declarations about my worth and capabilities that shaped the course of my life in ways he never intended. And the boys? How do they feel about meeting the man who abandoned you both? Emma smiled slightly. They're curious, primarily from a genetic perspective. Mason asked if he could bring a DNA sampling kit. Lynn laughed, despite his concern. Of course he did. His expression grew serious again. Just be careful, Emma. You've achieved everything without vindictiveness. Don't let this encounter change that. The week before the New York trip unfolded in a carefully orchestrated sequence of preparations. Emma's team arranged for the Sullivan corporate jet, secured the presidential suite at the Four Seasons, and scheduled the boys' Harvard admissions interviews for the same week, a coincidence too perfect to ignore. The triplets approached the upcoming encounter with characteristic differences. Michael researched Blake Montgomery's business history, analyzing his strategic decisions with clinical detachment. Matthew calculated the statistical probability of various reactions Blake might have upon seeing them. Mason worried primarily about the emotional impact on his mother, preparing subtle supportive gestures for moments when he anticipated she might need strength. On Wednesday evening, Emma found herself standing in her expansive closet, evaluating options for the keynote address. Her wardrobe had evolved dramatically from the days of thrift store finds and discount rack necessities. Now, designer pieces in a carefully curated palette reflected both her position and her personal aesthetic. She selected a precisely tailored black Armani dress, elegant, authoritative, and subtly devastating in its simplicity. Blake had once told her she lacked what was necessary for his world. The irony that she now moved through that world with greater ease than he did himself was not lost on her. The morning of their departure, Emma reviewed her presentation one final time while the boys packed their identical Rimowa suitcases with methodical efficiency. Each had prepared meticulously for their Harvard interviews, though all three had already received early interest letters based on their extraordinary academic achievements and technological innovations. As they boarded the Sullivan Tech private jet, Mason paused at the top of the stairs, turning to study his mother's expression. "Are you nervous, Mom?" Emma considered the question as the other two settled into their seats, already engrossed in their tablets. Was she nervous? 15 years ago, Blake Montgomery had reduced her to nothing, a sobbing, pregnant girl sleeping in a bus station with $237 to her name. Now she commanded a company valued at $3.7 billion, had raised 3 exceptional sons, and was about to become the largest shareholder in his family's enterprise. "No," she replied with perfect serenity. "I'm ready." While the private jet soared eastward toward New York, Emma watched her sons discuss their Harvard interviews with animated intelligence. She thought about the symmetry of it all. Blake had once boasted of his Harvard connections while keeping her hidden from that world. Now his biological sons would likely attend his alma mater, their acceptance based entirely on their own extraordinary merits. In the cabin's subtle lighting, their profiles were strikingly familiar. The same strong jawline, the same thoughtful set of the brow that she had once found so attractive in Blake. Yet behind those identical features were minds that had been shaped not by privilege or entitlement, but by perseverance, purpose, and the unwavering belief that value came from character rather than circumstance. As the Manhattan skyline appeared on the horizon, Emma felt a strange sense of completion. 15 years ago, she had been ejected from this city, humiliated and desperate. Now she returned triumphant, not through vindictiveness, but through the quiet, relentless excellence that had transformed a hastily written list of goals in a homeless shelter into the reality that surrounded her. While the plane descended toward Teterboro Airport, Emma thought about the expression that would cross Blake Montgomery's face when he realized who exactly would be delivering the keynote address at his prestigious event. More importantly, she thought about his reaction when he saw 3 15-year-old versions of himself walking confidently beside her. "Landing in 10 minutes, announced the pilot over the intercom. Mason looked up from his book, his intuitive gaze finding his mother's. "You're nervous, Mom?" "No," responded Emma with absolute certainty. "I'm ready." The descent into Teterboro was smooth, the Manhattan skyline glittering against the darkening horizon. As the Sullivan Tech jet taxied to a private hangar, Emma felt a strange calm settle over her, the tranquility that comes with absolute certainty. 15 years of building, planning, and rising had led to this moment. "We've arrived, Ms. Sullivan Chen," the pilot announced as the engines quieted. The sleek black town car waiting on the tarmac whisked them through the evening traffic toward Manhattan. Emma watched her sons' identical profiles as they gazed out at the city, a place they'd visited before but never with such significance. In the soft interior lighting, their features appeared even more strikingly reminiscent of Blake's. "The plaza looks exactly like its photographs," Matthew observed as they passed the iconic building where tomorrow's gala would be held. Constructed in 1907, French Renaissance chateau-style architecture, Michael added automatically. 282 guest rooms, including 60 suites. Mason, ever attuned to emotional undercurrents, simply reached across to squeeze Emma's hand. "Tomorrow will be interesting," he said quietly. Their suite at the Four Seasons occupied the entire 52nd floor, offering panoramic views of Central Park and the city beyond. While the boys settled in, Emma stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection superimposed against the glittering cityscape. The frightened young woman who had once been expelled from this island now returned as one of its most powerful visitors. Morning brought final preparations. Emma reviewed her presentation while her sons attended their Harvard interviews, scheduled conveniently near the hotel. When they returned, their expressions were quietly confident. "The admissions director mentioned she's been following our work in neural interface development," Michael reported, adjusting his tie. "She seemed particularly interested in the applications for nonverbal autism patients." My interviewer asked about the mathematical models underlying our diagnostic algorithms, Matthew added. "I explained the matrix transformations we've implemented in the latest version." Mason, characteristically, had a different focus. "Mine wanted to know about the ethical framework we've developed for AI medical decisions. I think she was testing our understanding of human impact beyond the technology." As evening approached, Emma dressed in her carefully selected Armani, her chestnut hair arranged in an elegant chignon. The triplets emerged from their rooms in perfectly tailored suits, indistinguishable except for the subtle color differences in their ties: blue for Michael, green for Matthew, red for Mason. "The car is waiting," Vivian announced, appearing at the suite's entrance. "And the press release about the Montgomery Enterprises share acquisition goes live in exactly 43 minutes. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel embodied old-world opulence, crystal chandeliers cascading from ornate ceilings, tables draped in white linen and adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, waitstaff navigating the space with practiced precision. 400 of America's most influential business leaders mingled, the combined net worth in the room exceeding the GDP of many small nations. Blake Montgomery stood on the stage, commanding attention with practiced ease. At 42, he had aged well, hair slightly silvered at the temples, face maintaining its chiseled handsomeness, body kept trim by expensive personal trainers. His bespoke tuxedo whispered of privilege and tradition. "And as the new president of the association, I'm proud to announce our initiative to incubate startups led by minorities and women," he was saying, voice resonating through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Montgomery Enterprises has always believed in equal opportunity." Emma stood just outside the ballroom's grand doors, her sons positioned behind her. Through the small gap, she could see Blake gesturing emphatically, his audience nodding in appreciation of sentiments that felt hollow given what she knew of the man behind them. "Ready?" she asked softly, not turning around. "Ready?" 3 voices confirmed in unison. The doors opened silently. Emma entered first, her stride confident and measured. The triplets followed, their height and bearing drawing immediate attention. Conversations faltered as heads turned, gazes moving from Emma to the 3 young men behind her, recognition and confusion dawning on faces throughout the room. Blake continued speaking, unaware of the subtle shift in atmosphere. "That's why I'm especially honored to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, a visionary in technology whose work has revolutionized modern medicine." His eyes scanned the crowd as he spoke, finally landing on Emma. For a microsecond, something flickered across his face, a ghost of recognition quickly suppressed. But when his gaze moved to the three young men behind her, Blake Montgomery, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, lost his composure completely. The sentence died on his lips. The microphone captured his sudden intake of breath, the sound amplified throughout the ballroom. 400 guests, puzzled by the abrupt silence, followed his stunned gaze to the Sullivan Chen family, now taking their seats at a table near the stage. As I was saying," Blake attempted to recover, hands visibly trembling as he shuffled his notes. "Our keynote speaker, Emma Sullivan Chen." Applause filled the room as Emma ascended the stage with practiced grace. As she passed Blake, the subtle scent of her perfume, the same she had worn 15 years ago, triggered a visible flinch. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery," she said into the microphone, her voice melodious and controlled. "It's fascinating how life's paths sometimes intersect in unexpected ways, isn't it?" For the next 30 minutes, Emma presented Sullivan Tech's vision of humanized technology, ethical artificial intelligence, and the future of personalized medicine. Each slide displayed impressive statistics about her company's growth. Each case study demonstrated lives saved through their innovations. With every achievement she outlined, Blake seemed to sink deeper into his chair at the head table, his eyes fixed alternately on her and the three identical young men in the front row. Vanessa Montgomery, seated beside her husband with diamonds glittering at her thin neck, noticed his strange behavior. Her eyes narrowed as she tracked Blake's line of sight to the triplets, who were politely applauding each point of Emma's presentation. "And that's why Sullivan Tech has recently expanded its advisory board to include young leaders," Emma continued, approaching her conclusion, "including my sons, who at 15 have already developed technologies benefiting thousands of children." The spotlight shifted to illuminate the triplets, who acknowledged the applause with poised nods. The resemblance to Blake was now unmistakable to anyone looking, the shape of their faces, their eyes, even the way Michael slightly tilted his head while smiling. At the head table, Vanessa Montgomery gripped her husband's arm with sudden force. "Blake, who are those boys? Why are they looking at you that way?" Emma delivered her final revelation with perfect timing. "As my financial team should be officially announcing at this moment, Sullivan Tech Innovation Holdings has just finalized acquisition of 26% of Montgomery Enterprises shares, making us the largest individual shareholder. We look forward to a productive collaboration with the current leadership, for as long as it remains." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Blake stood abruptly, knocking over his champagne glass, the golden liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like a slow-motion spill of his family's fortune. "This is some kind of joke?" he shouted, forgetting decorum entirely. "You can't just appear after all these years and—" 15 years to be exact, Emma interrupted, still at the microphone. "Long enough to transform a worthless waitress into your boss, apparently." Photographers from the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, present to cover the gala, captured the scene in rapid bursts of flashes, immortalizing the moment for tomorrow's front pages. Blake stormed toward the stage, attempting to grab the microphone, but Emma calmly handed it to an event organizer and stepped away. In the backstage area, shielded from the confused crowd, Blake finally caught up with her. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Those boys, they're your biological children? Yes, the same ones you paid me $10,000 to solve the problem. Triplets, actually. Quite a surprise, wasn't it? For me, too." Blake ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it for the first time in years. "Why didn't you tell me? I had a right to know." Emma laughed, a genuine sound of disbelief. "A right? You literally had me escorted out of your building. You said I wasn't Montgomery material, that I lacked education, connections, or value." From the ballroom, now in complete chaos, Vanessa Montgomery emerged into the backstage area, followed closely by the triplets, who observed the unfolding scene with scientific curiosity. "Blake, what is happening? Who are these boys?" Emma extended her hand to Blake's wife. "Mrs. Montgomery, I presume. I'm Emma Sullivan Chen." These are Michael, Matthew, and Mason Sullivan Chen, or Montgomery if you prefer biological accuracy. Vanessa recoiled as if physically struck. Blake? It's not what it looks like, he stammered, face flushed. It was a long time ago, before us. 15 years, 4 months, and 16 days, Matthew offered helpfully, calculating from our birth date and average gestational period for triplets. Vanessa tore the diamond necklace from her throat and threw it at Blake's feet, the precious stones scattering across the polished floor. You told me you had no children, that you wanted to start a family with me. The triplets watched the scene unfold with identical expressions of analytical interest. Michael finally approached Blake, studying the man up close. Interesting. We have the same earlobe shape. It's a dominant genetic trait. Mason added his observation. And the same melanin distribution in the iris. Grayish-blue, partial heterochromatic pattern. Blake stared at the young men, seeing his own image tripled. You're extraordinary. Yes, Emma agreed, her voice steady. And they grew up without needing a penny of your money. While the New York Times first edition was being prepared with the headline that would define the next decade in business circles, Emma knew that the real test would come tomorrow, when her sons would finally have the chance to ask their questions of the man who had never wanted to know them. While the New York Times first edition was being prepared with the headline that would define the next decade in business circles, Emma knew that the real test would come tomorrow, when her sons would finally have the chance to ask their questions of the man who had never wanted to know them. Dawn broke over Manhattan with unforgiving clarity, bathing the city in harsh golden light that seemed to illuminate every truth, no matter how long buried. Emma stood at the window of the Four Seasons suite, watching the city awaken while her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. The New York Times headline glared from her screen. Confrontation at the Plaza. Sullivan Tech CEO reveals secret children of Montgomery magnate. The accompanying photograph captured the precise moment of Blake's recognition, his face frozen in shock as he stared at 3 younger versions of himself. The article detailed how the brilliant tech innovator Emma Sullivan Chen had revealed her triplet sons to their biological father, while simultaneously announcing her company's acquisition of controlling interest in his family enterprise. In his penthouse apartment 20 blocks away, Blake Montgomery sat alone, phone disconnected, television silenced, the morning papers scattered across his marble coffee table. Vanessa had departed for their Hamptons estate at 2 a.m., her hastily packed Louis Vuitton luggage accompanied by a terse statement that her attorney would be in contact. The perfectly controlled life he had constructed was disintegrating around him, pixel by pixel, like a corrupted digital image. At precisely 10:27, his personal cell phone, the number known to fewer than 20 people, rang. Blake stared at the screen, not recognizing the number. Desperation for human contact overrode caution. Blake Montgomery, he answered, voice hoarse from a sleepless night. The boys would like to speak with you. Emma's voice, cool and professional, carried no hint of triumph or anger. We'll be at the Four Seasons at 2. Don't bring lawyers, PR people, or media. Just you. Before he could respond, she had disconnected. Blake sat motionless, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to silence. The presidential suite of the Four Seasons resembled a business meeting more than a family reunion. The triplets Sullivan Chen waited with their mother, 3 exceptional teenagers with the poise of young executives and the analytical minds that had already revolutionized their respective fields. When Blake entered, his normally immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, his suit slightly rumpled, shadows beneath his eyes, hands uncharacteristically fidgeting with his platinum watch. "Thank you for receiving me," he said formally, as though addressing board members rather than his biological children. Michael, with the directness that characterized him, wasted no time on pleasantries. "We have some questions about our paternal medical history, genetic factors relevant to our health profiles." Blake blinked, clearly not expecting this pragmatic approach. Of course. There's no cancer in my direct line, but my father had heart problems, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. He died at 62. For the next 2 hours, the boys conducted what amounted to a methodical interview about genetic predispositions, familial longevity patterns, and heritable traits. They asked about cognitive patterns in the Montgomery line, documented cases of mental illness, allergies, and metabolic tendencies. Blake answered each question with increasing bewilderment at their detached, scientific approach. Emma observed silently from the suite's terrace, allowing her sons this interaction without interference. The Manhattan skyline stretched behind her, a testament to human ambition and construction, not unlike the life she had built from the rubble of Blake's rejection. When the medical interrogation concluded, an awkward silence fell over the room. Blake finally gathered his courage to address the elephant in the room. "Would you—" His voice caught unexpectedly. "Would you like to know me? As your father? I understand it's late, incredibly late, but we could try. I have resources, connections. I could—" Mason interrupted with gentle firmness. "We have a father. Lin Chen adopted us legally when we were 4 years old. He doesn't share our DNA, but he was present at every recital, competition, and doctor's appointment." Blake's face fell, the reality of his absence finally hitting him with full force. "I see, I understand." He composed himself, retreating to the language of transaction, his comfort zone. "What about financial support? I could establish trust funds, pay for universities, create opportunities." Matthew's slight smile held no malice, just factual confidence. "We've all received full scholarships to Harvard. We begin next fall, at 16. And we manage our own investment portfolios," Michael added matter-of-factly. "Mason developed a trading algorithm that's outperformed the S&P 500 by 23% over the past 3 years. Blake stared at the 3 young men before him, brilliant, confident, poised, and the magnitude of his loss struck him with physical force. These weren't just children he had abandoned. They were prodigies who carried his genetic material but had been shaped entirely by someone else's values. "Emma," he finally addressed the woman watching from the terrace, "may I speak with you privately?" When the triplets had retreated to the adjoining bedroom, Blake seemed to deflate, the carefully constructed facade of powerful businessmen crumbling to reveal the frightened man beneath. "I made the worst mistake of my life that day," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about what might have been different." Emma studied him dispassionately, her expression betraying neither satisfaction nor anger. "Is this genuine remorse or concern about your plummeting stock? You have every right to hate me." "That's the problem, Blake. I don't hate you. That would require you still having emotional significance in my life." Through the suite's windows, Manhattan's skyline stretched endlessly. The same city where 15 years earlier she had slept in a bus station, pregnant and homeless because of the man now seeking absolution. "What do you want then? Revenge? My company? My reputation?" Emma smiled for the first time. "None of those things. I want you to understand something fundamental. That $10,000 check was the best gift you could have given me." "How's that?" Blake asked, genuine confusion crossing his face. "It showed me exactly who you were, and it allowed me to raise 3 extraordinary young men who will never be like you. Men who will never measure someone's worth by their social status or bank account." Blake wiped away an unexpected tear. "And what happens now? With the shares you bought?" "Business is business. Sullivan Tech will remain the majority shareholder in Montgomery Enterprises. Our executives will join your board next week. You'll continue as CEO for now. And the boys? They know who you are biologically. If they want any relationship with you in the future, that will be their decision, not mine." When Blake left the suite, he found the triplets in the corridor, animatedly discussing a new programming language they were developing. They paused, looked at him politely, and Michael extended a business card. This is my contact information in case you want to forward those detailed medical records we discussed. It would be scientifically valuable. Blake took the card, noting the Sullivan Tech Innovation Youth Program logo. You work for your mother's company? No, Matthew corrected. We have our own division. We develop assistive technologies for children with disabilities. With $17 million in revenue last fiscal year, Mason added quietly. When the elevator arrived, Blake entered and turned for a final look at the three versions of himself. Younger, but with something he had never possessed. Purpose beyond profit, compassion beyond appearances, and an integrity no fortune could purchase. As the doors closed, Blake Montgomery understood the true meaning of poverty for the first time. Not financial poverty, but the spiritual bankruptcy that had led him to discard what could have been the greatest treasure of his life. That evening, as Montgomery Enterprises' board of directors convened an emergency meeting, Emma and her sons boarded the private jet back to California. There was no vindictive triumph in her expression, only the serenity of someone who had finally closed a painful chapter. "Are you okay, Mom?" Mason asked, always the most sensitive of the three. Emma smiled, watching Manhattan's lights diminish through the aircraft window. "I'm at peace. Finally." 15 years earlier, a man had declared she had no value, education, or future. Now, Emma Sullivan Chen commanded a technological empire, had raised 3 extraordinary sons, and had just added his company to her portfolio. Not out of revenge, but because, in the end, she had proven the only thing that truly mattered, that a person's worth is never measured by those who reject them, but by how they rebuild themselves from the ruins. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.